So as we talked about in lecture, when we talk about structure, we're not just talking about what's live, the growing trees in the stand, but the dead trees. And here we'll get more into that morticulture, if you will. So while this may not totally hit the bar in terms of what some people might consider an old growth stand by structural threshold definitions, and it might not satisfy purists who want to define old growth as a forest that has never been touched. It does have a lot of interesting old growth characteristics. So in addition to these really old trees that are almost 200 years old, what other characteristics do we see? So behind me is one. So getting into that morticulture, here we see a nice big, as my daughter would say, big, huge, big snag. So this is a dead sugar maple tree. You can see its top broke off up there. And it's right here next to the tree. So in contrast to when we harvest a forest silviculturally, we're often trying to salvage some of the value from that stand to finance the management. Natural disturbances leave the wood behind. And so more and more in the paradigm of ecosystem management and ecological silviculture, we're thinking about these legacies and what we leave behind. So on this snag, and the size of this snag is important because different size snags function in different ways. So we have a number of species of woodpeckers, and our largest species, the pileated woodpecker, requires really big trees. And you can see some pileated woodpecker excavations, these long rectangular cavities are from pileated woodpeckers excavating holes and foraging for insects or potentially creating nesting cavities. So pileated woodpeckers require really big trees. Smaller woodpeckers, downy woodpeckers, and hairy woodpeckers can get by with smaller trees. So this large snag provides habitat for pileated woodpeckers. Now what about the wood on the forest floor that came from the top? What is going on here? I am not great with mushrooms, but there are a lot of mushrooms colonizing this log. So this log is functioning to provide a substrate and habitat for some fungi. Other species here. And then there's another big log over here that's even more decomposed. And it looks like it fell down right from the base. This probably functioned as a snag for a while and then eventually fell down as it became more and more decomposed. So looking around, we see large snags and large pieces of coarse woody debris decomposing on the forest floor. And these are really important characteristics of old growth forests that we can silviculturally manage for. I'm also seeing a number of age classes here, so certainly portions of this stand have 3 or more age classes, and you see that if you walk around. Now here's another snag or standing dead tree. And this is a nice illustration of a canopy gap. So when these trees die, they open up the canopy. So you can see a canopy opening up there. A nice canopy opening. And the larger the tree, the bigger the canopy opening. So old growth forests with big trees create bigger openings when the trees die in a windstorm or from other age-related or density-related causes. And this gap is not super recent, so it must have been a big gap to still see it here today. And in this gap and around it, we can see some smaller sapling and pole-sized trees that are taking advantage of the increases in light and other resources. In addition to this lush understory. So surrounding this gap, you can see that there's not much going on in the understory here. But if we look back into the gap, there's quite a contrast. So the increased light or soil moisture or both together create opportunities for trees to recruit in and around gaps and other species in the understory to live in these gaps. And these gaps, the locations of gaps shift over time, so this gap will close as trees grow, as adjacent canopies expand into the gap and saplings recruit from inside the gaps. And conditions will become dark again, resources will decrease, and these conditions will not be favorable for these understory species anymore. So, but they're will occupy gaps that are created in the future. So it's important to maintain this gap dynamic in order to maintain all these gap dependent species, as well as the flow of dead wood on the floor, coarse woody debris, and standing snags for the species that depend on that. So these gap dynamics in old growth forests can maintain continuity in those features over time. And the ecosystem management paradigm shift has led silviculturists to think about how can we do that too in managed forests. So let's carry on.